my new book. I'll just put it down there. It's a bit heavy to hold up for long.
And it's called?
It's called Home is Where the House Is.
And when was it published?
On the 28th of this month.
Which is?
Which is May 2021.
Yeah. So tell us briefly what the book's about.
Well, it's about all the houses that a family lived in the first 30 years after the war, World War II, that is.
So when did you first move to the first house, Spring Street, in Orange?
In December 1945.
Okay. So how hard was it to get a house to live in after the Second World War?
It was very difficult to rent a house because all the forces were coming home and a lot of them were married during the war or getting married after the war, and they all wanted a home to live in. And of course that made houses scarce. Rents were high, and a lot of the time people had to pay key money, they called it. They had to pay money to get into the house. And this applied both to rental houses and buying a house. It cost you more to buy a house because they were wanting to buy houses as well, those that could afford them.
So what inspired you to write the book from the perspective of a house?
I'm not sure, really. I've often heard them say of a house, I wonder what this house could tell you if it could talk. So I got the idea of making the houses talk and telling the story of the family.
And was that difficult to do?
Well, you had to be careful to make sure that everything that the house knew was what they'd heard or saw that happened in the house.
Right, so anything that you needed to put in there in the plot had to be something the house had heard or was seen.
Yes,
yeah,
the house knew about it.
So on the cover, there's a car.
Yes.
You want to show the cover again? So can you tell us about what sort of car this was and when you had this car?
Well, we didn't have this car, but we had a car that was the same sort of car. The actual cover was done in England, and it was rather a coincidence that they happened to put this car on because it was the first car that we ever bought.
And when did you first have a car?
About 1949.
So when you first moved to Spring Street, you didn't have a car?
No, of course not. We spent our last few shillings buying the house. We had nothing left in the bank when we moved in.
So how did you get groceries and things like that if you didn't have a car?
Well, they were all delivered. We had a man come in and take our orders from the biggest shop in town for groceries, and then they would deliver them. We had milk was delivered in a car, or sometimes a It's horse and sulky type of horse and it wasn't a sulky, it was a sort of a boxy thing that they sat up
horse
on.
and cart.
Yeah, it's like a cart.
And that was in milk bottles, was it?
No. When we were first there, we used to have to put a billy can out and tell them how much we wanted and leave the money alongside the billy can.
Okay.
And I used to always get a pint each for myself and my husband, and a pint for each of the children. So we had a lot of milk to use each day.
And you had bread delivered as well?
We had bread delivered, and we had fruit and vegetables delivered. The only thing that wasn't delivered was meat, and I had to walk a couple of blocks to the butcher shop.
So you moved in 1952 to Pendle Hill. That's a long way away from Orange, right into the city of Sydney. Why did you have to move? Why?
Because my husband wanted to get promotion in the post office, and he couldn't do that unless he went to school down in Sydney. There was a telegraphist and postal clerk school, and we had to move down there for him to go to school.
So, did you work at all in these years? Were you working as well?
No, because I had two small children, and besides which, not very many women did work in those days if they could help it. And with all the men coming back out of work, they were the ones that got to work first.
So, if you needed things that you couldn't afford, what kinds of things did you have to do? You know, you able to make clothes for the children, or what things did you do when you were at home?
I made all their own all the clothes for the children myself.
So that was sewing on a sewing machine?
Yes, I had an old treadle sewing machine.
And did you knit as well?
Of course, yes.
So looking at all the houses, there are 5 of them. You went from Orange, you went to Sydney, you came back from Sydney, back to Orange again, and you went to Byng Street. So it was 1960 to 1966. So was that different for you, that second time in Orange? Were things better or a bit easier?
Not really. It was much better for my husband because he only had to get on his bike and go to work, come home for lunch. Whereas in Sydney, he'd spend an hour and a half each way to work, right in the city.
On the train?
On the train.
Right.
So it was much better for him. And, of course, it was better for me because I saw a lot more of him.
Plus, your family was in Orange still, weren't they?
Oh, yes, of course. My mother and father were in Sydney at that time, but I had a sister and her husband and children there.
So looking back on all the houses after you went you were in Orange till 1966, and you went to Windine. And after that, in 1971, you went out to that small country town called Area Park. So which one of the 5 did you enjoy the best? And which house did you like the most?
Well, I think we enjoyed the social life out in the small country town, which was very good. The house was a government house because my husband was a postmaster then, his first job as a postmaster. And the house was very solid, very comfortable, but quite old.
And one of the best things was the garden, wasn't it?
Oh, the garden. Well, I couldn't believe it when we saw the orchard, because one of the things that did happen to us by moving was that I'd plant fruit trees and they'd be just about ready to bear fruit and we'd have to move. I wrote a story once about a rolling stone gathers no fruit because we'd have to leave it behind. But when we got to Area Park, we had all this wonderful fruit to eat. That was great.
And you did actually start working when you were in Area Park again, didn't you?
Oh, well, I often helped out in the post office, yes, because there was only two in the post office, and if one of them was away, it was me that was called upon to go in and help.
Is there anything else you'd like to add about the book? I mean, can you tell us how long it took to write? How long you were writing this book, and what did you use how did you remember things so well in so much detail?
Well, I've always had a good memory, plus the fact that I've been writing diaries since 1970, and that was a help. But mainly I used my memory of what happened.
All right, thank you. And we hope everyone enjoys the book. Any things that you'd like to tell your readers?
Well, I hope you enjoy it, because I certainly enjoyed writing it. And it did take me a long time. And I had some periods after my first husband died where I didn't do any writing on it. And then I remarried at 85. And my husband and I had a lot of trips. Once again, the book was left to wait till I finally lost my husband again, and then I finished the book.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you.